A film critic wrote that Clint Eastwood had no business directing movies. Years later, Clint won Best Director at the Oscars. What he said on that stage became one of the most savage thank yous in Academy Award history. The year was 1992. Clint Eastwood had just directed Unforgiven, a dark, revisionist Western that would change his career forever. But before the world recognized it as a masterpiece, before the awards and the standing ovations, one critic decided Clint's directing days should end before they really began. His name was Gene Siskel. Not just any critic. Gene Siskel was half of the most powerful film criticism duo in America. Siskel and Ebert. Their show reached millions. Their thumbs up or thumbs down could make or break a film's box office. Studios feared them. Actors courted them. A single negative review from Siskel could cost a film tens of millions. He wasn't just a critic. He was a kingmaker. And he had decided Clint Eastwood was a problem. Siskel had built his reputation on being brutally honest, sometimes cruel. He took pride in destroying what he called Hollywood pretension. He'd savaged directors who thought they were artists, mocked actors who tried to be more than entertainers. His writing was sharp, witty, devastating. People read his reviews not just for guidance, but for the blood sport of watching him demolish careers with a few well-chosen words. Clint Eastwood has no business directing films, Siskel wrote in his Chicago Tribune column. He's a fine action star, but behind the camera, he's lost. His films lack depth, lack vision, lack any real artistic merit. He should stick to what he does best, squinting and shooting guns. The review was brutal. Worse than brutal. It was dismissive. It treated Clint not as a filmmaker with potential, but as an actor who'd made a foolish mistake by trying to direct. Siskel went further. Hollywood has enough mediocre directors. We don't need action stars padding their egos by playing auteur. This wasn't about one film. This was about Clint's entire directing career. The message was clear. Stay in your lane, cowboy. Acting is your job. Directing is for real filmmakers. Clint read the review. He said nothing publicly. No angry response. No defensive interview. He just kept working. But those who knew him saw something change. There was a quiet determination now, a focus that went beyond just making movies. He was going to prove Siskel wrong, not with words, with work. Clint had been directing since 1971, starting with Play Misty for Me. Over 2 decades he'd directed over 15 films. Some were commercial hits, some were critical darlings. But Siskel's words stung because they touched a nerve. Hollywood still saw Clint as the cowboy who tried directing, not as a serious filmmaker. Then came Unforgiven. Clint had been sitting on the script for years. Written by David Webb Peoples, it was a Western unlike anything Hollywood had seen. Dark, morally complex. No heroes, only broken men trying to survive their past. Studios were nervous. Westerns were dead. Dark Westerns were suicide. But Clint saw something in the script. This was his chance to make the film that would define him as a director. He spent years preparing. He assembled a perfect cast. Morgan Freeman, Gene Hackman, Richard Harris. He scouted locations in Alberta, Canada, finding landscapes that felt haunted. He worked with cinematographer Jack Green to create a visual style that felt cold, unforgiving, real. Production was tight, disciplined. Clint directed and starred, working 18-hour days, never losing focus. He knew this film had to be perfect. Not just good, perfect, because if Unforgiven failed, Siskel's words would become prophecy. The film wrapped in 1992. Early screenings were promising, but Clint remained cautious. He'd been through this before. Good reviews, modest box office, then forgotten. But something about Unforgiven felt different. The audiences weren't just watching. They were shaken. Warner Brothers scheduled the premiere for August 1992. The reviews started coming in, not good reviews. Legendary reviews. Critics called it a masterpiece, a film that redefined the Western genre, a meditation on violence and redemption that felt timeless. Roger Ebert, Siskel's partner, gave it 4 stars. A film of great power and vision, he wrote. The New York Times called it the best Western since The Wild Bunch. Variety predicted multiple Academy Award nominations. And Gene Siskel? Silence. For weeks, nothing. Then finally, a short review. He called the film competent but overrated, doubling down on his original stance. Clint Eastwood, in Siskel's mind, was still just an actor playing director. The box office didn't care about Siskel's opinion. Unforgiven became a massive hit, earning over $159 million worldwide. Audiences who'd never cared about westerns came to see what the fuss was about. The film had struck a chord. It wasn't just entertainment, it was art. Then came award season. Golden Globes, Best Director nomination, Directors Guild Award nomination, BAFTA nomination, and finally, the Academy Awards, 9 nominations, including Best Picture and Best Director. Oscar night, March 29, 1993. Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles. Clint arrived calm, composed, wearing his signature understated black tuxedo. He'd been to the Oscars before, but always as an actor or a nominee who didn't win. Tonight felt different. Backstage before the ceremony, other directors approached him. Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese. They knew what this night meant. "You deserve this," Spielberg told him quietly. Clint just nodded. He wasn't one for emotional displays. But inside, something was building. Years of being dismissed. Years of critics like Siskel treating his work as actor vanity projects. Tonight was reckoning. The ceremony moved slowly. Unforgiven was winning. Best Supporting Actor for Gene Hackman. Best Film Editing. The momentum was building. Each win tightened the tension. The audience could feel it. This wasn't just another Western winning technical awards. This was a complete sweep incoming. Then came the moment. Best Director. The category Siskel had said Clint had no business being in. The nominees were read aloud. Neil Jordan for The Crying Game, James Ivory for Howard's End, Robert Altman for The Player, Martin Brest for Scent of a Woman, and Clint Eastwood for Unforgiven. The camera cut to Clint. His face revealed nothing, that same controlled expression he'd used in 100 westerns. But his hand, resting on the armrest, was perfectly still. Too still. The stillness of someone using every ounce of control to remain calm. The presenter opened the envelope. And the Oscar goes to Clint Eastwood, Unforgiven. The audience erupted. Standing ovation, not polite applause, genuine, emotional celebration. Steven Spielberg was applauding. Jack Nicholson was on his feet. Even actors who'd competed against Clint for roles were clapping. Clint walked to the stage, slow, measured. That same quiet confidence he'd brought to every Western he'd ever made. He took the Oscar, felt its weight, and looked out at the audience. For a moment, he said nothing, just stood there, absorbing the moment. Then he began his speech. "I'd like to thank the Academy for this honor. This film was a labor of love, and I'm grateful to everyone who believed in it." Standard Oscar speech. Gracious, professional. The audience waited for him to finish and leave, but Clint wasn't done. "I also want to thank someone who probably isn't watching tonight," Clint continued, his voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. "Gene Siskel." The audience stirred. Siskel's name at the Oscars? This wasn't normal. "Gene wrote that I had no business directing films," Clint said, his tone still calm but carrying an unmistakable bite. "He said I should stick to squinting and shooting guns, that Hollywood didn't need actors playing auteur." The room went silent. This was unprecedented. Oscar speeches were for thanking agents and family, not calling out critics. "Gene, I want to thank you," Clint continued, "because your review taught me something important. It taught me that critics don't make films, filmmakers do, and while you were writing about what I couldn't do, I was doing it." The audience was frozen. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others were trying not to smile. This was the most savage thank you speech in Academy Award history, delivered in Clint's signature quiet, controlled style. "This Oscar isn't despite your review, Gene," Clint said. "It's because of it. You gave me motivation every time I doubted myself. Every time a scene wasn't working, I thought about your words. And I worked harder, so thank you for the fuel. I hope you're enjoying watching me hold this." Clint raised the Oscar slightly, a small gesture that somehow carried enormous weight. Then he walked off stage. No dramatic exit, no mic drop. Just quiet, devastating victory. Backstage, reporters swarmed Clint. Was that aimed at Siskel? Do you regret calling him out? What if he responds? Clint's answer was characteristically brief. I thanked him, that's all. But the press room was chaos. Entertainment journalists were already filing stories. Eastwood destroys Critic in Oscar speech. Most savage thank you in Academy history. Networks were replaying the clip. Within an hour, it was the only thing anyone was talking about. Other directors approached Clint, some congratulating him, others looking uncomfortable. One veteran director pulled him aside. That was bold, dangerous maybe. Critics have long memories. Clint just smiled, that slight Eastwood smile. So do I, he said quietly. Warner Brothers executives were nervous. They'd just won Best Director and possibly Best Picture, but Clint had publicly called out one of America's most powerful film critics. Would this hurt future releases? Would Siskel's network retaliate? Would other critics close ranks? But everyone in Hollywood knew what had just happened. Clint Eastwood had delivered one of the most perfectly calibrated responses to criticism ever seen. Not angry, not bitter, just factual. Siskel said he couldn't direct. Clint held an Oscar that said otherwise. Gene Siskel watched the ceremony at home. Friends later said he was furious, felt blindsided, called Clint's speech classless. His phone rang all night. Colleagues, other critics, network executives. Everyone wanted his response. Siskel refused to comment that night, but those close to him said he paced his apartment for hours, replaying the moment, trying to figure out how to respond to being publicly humiliated on the biggest night in Hollywood. The next morning, his voicemail was full. Talk show producers wanted him on air. Newspapers wanted quotes. His own network, seeing ratings gold in the controversy, suggested a special episode addressing Clint's comments. Siskel declined everything. For 2 weeks he stayed silent while the entertainment world debated his feud with Clint. When he finally addressed it on his show, his response was measured but defensive. Clint Eastwood gave a good speech, Siskel said carefully. But one Oscar doesn't erase my concerns about his filmmaking. Unforgiven is a solid film. That doesn't make him a great director. His co-host, Roger Ebert, said nothing, but the awkwardness was visible. Ebert had loved Unforgiven. The two critics, usually in sync, were clearly divided, and everyone watching knew Siskel had lost this round. But publicly, Siskel said nothing. What could he say? Clint had just won Best Director for a film Siskel called mediocre. Unforgiven went on to win Best Picture that same night. Clint stood on stage again, this time as producer, accepting the highest honor in filmmaking. He didn't mention Siskel again. He didn't need to. The point was made. The film industry's response was immediate. Directors who'd been dismissed as just actors suddenly had leverage. Studios became more willing to take chances on actor-directors. Clint's Oscar wasn't just personal vindication. It was a statement. Critics don't define careers. Work does. Siskel and Clint never spoke again. In interviews years later, Siskel maintained his position, insisting Unforgiven was overrated and that one Oscar didn't make someone a great director, but his credibility on the subject was forever compromised. How do you criticize a filmmaker who proved you wrong on the biggest stage in cinema? Clint continued directing. A Perfect World. The Bridges of Madison County. Mystic River. $1 Million Baby, which won him a second Best Director Oscar. Gran Torino. American Sniper. By the time of his passing, he'd directed over 40 films, won multiple Academy Awards, and become one of the most respected filmmakers in history. Gene Siskel died in 1999, 6 years after that Oscar ceremony. In his final years, he softened slightly on Clint, acknowledging his consistency, if not his genius. But he never retracted his original statement. Clint Eastwood, in Siskel's mind, was still an actor who got lucky. Hollywood remembers it differently. That 1993 Oscar speech became legendary. Film students study it. Directors reference it. It's taught in film schools as an example of how to respond to criticism. Not with anger, but with excellence. Clint himself rarely discusses it. When asked about Siskel in later interviews, his response is always the same. Critics have a job to do. My job is making films. We did our jobs. But those who were in the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion that night remember something different. They remember the silence after Clint's thank you, the weight of his words, the perfect, surgical precision of calling out a critic on the night you prove them catastrophically wrong. They remember Clint Eastwood standing on that stage holding an Oscar that said Best Director and thanking the man who said he had no business directing. Not with bitterness. With victory. Because that's the ultimate revenge. Not anger, not insults, just winning, and making sure everyone knows exactly who said you couldn't.